I'm Jessica Miller, 32 years old, and I never imagined that finding my husband's wedding ring in my sister's purse would be the moment I realized I owned a $2 million house that was about to become his worst nightmare. The ring wasn't just sitting there innocently either, it was nestled between birth control pills and a hotel keycard from the Four Seasons, where apparently my marriage had been dying while my sister was busy planning her future with my husband. What David and Rachel didn't know was that the stunning Westlake Hills mansion they were dreaming of sharing had been purchased entirely with my inheritance money, my credit, and my financial guarantees. Legally, David's name might have been on some papers, but financially, I held all the cards, and I was about to play them in a way that would leave him drowning in debt while I walked away free. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Cedar Park, just outside Austin, my family looked like something straight out of a home improvement commercial. My father, Robert, worked as a successful insurance broker, building a steady business over 25 years. My mother, Linda, taught elementary school and spent her summers tending to what everyone in the neighborhood called the most beautiful garden in Texas. Rachel and I were the picture-perfect daughters. She was the social butterfly with natural charm who could light up any room, while I was the responsible older sister who excelled in academics and always had my life mapped out in detailed 5-year plans. Our childhood was filled with family barbecues by the pool, weekend trips to Lake Travis, and elaborate birthday parties that became legendary among our friends. Linda made sure we attended every school event together, whether it was Rachel's cheerleading competitions or my academic decathlon. Robert coached both our softball teams and never missed a single game, camera in hand, documenting every achievement. From the outside, we were the family everyone wanted to be part of, and honestly, from the inside, it felt pretty genuine too. Rachel was 3.5 years younger than me, and our age gap meant we never really competed directly. She was homecoming queen and prom princess, while I was valedictorian and student council president. She dated the captain of the football team, while I dated the editor of the school newspaper. We seemed to occupy completely different worlds, which made our relationship surprisingly close. I was protective of her, always ready to help with homework or boy problems, and she looked up to me as the sister who had everything figured out. The dynamic between us remained steady through high school and into college. Rachel went to Texas State for communications, where she joined a sorority, and spent 4 years perfecting her social media presence and event planning skills. I headed to UT Austin for business and marketing, diving deep into studies while working part-time internships that built my resume strategically. Even then, I was thinking long-term, planning for financial independence and career growth. Our parents were proud of both of us, though I noticed they seemed to worry more about Rachel's future and celebrate my achievements as expected rather than surprising. After college, I landed a marketing coordinator position at Digital Dynamics, a growing firm in downtown Austin that specialized in helping tech startups build their brand presence. The work was demanding but exciting, and I threw myself into learning every aspect of the business. My boss, Catherine Walsh, became a mentor who taught me that success in marketing wasn't just about creativity, it was about understanding psychology, data, and long-term relationship building. Within 2 years, I had been promoted to senior marketing strategist, and by year 4, I was managing major accounts and earning a salary that surprised even my ambitious younger self. Rachel, meanwhile, had moved to Nashville after college to pursue what she called her creative fate. She worked at various event planning companies, tried her hand at music industry networking, and dated a series of aspiring musicians and music producers. Her Instagram was a constant stream of honky-tonk bars, recording studios, and backstage passes to concerts. She seemed to be living the bohemian lifestyle she had always talked about, though I noticed during our monthly phone calls that she was constantly stressed about money and seemed to jump from job to job without building any real career momentum. David entered my life during my 5th year at Digital Dynamics, when his tech startup hired our firm to develop their launch strategy. He was the kind of guy who immediately commanded attention when he walked into a room, tall, confident, with the easy smile of someone who had never really failed at anything important. His company's streamlined logistics, was developing software to optimize supply chain management, and he spoke about it with the passion of someone who genuinely believed he was going to change the world. Our professional relationship began with late-night strategy sessions and weekend brainstorming meetings. David was the rare client who actually listened to marketing advice instead of just assuming he knew better than the experts he had hired. He asked thoughtful questions, challenged assumptions in productive ways, and treated everyone on our team with respect regardless of their position. What struck me most about him wasn't his obvious intelligence or business acumen, but the way he remembered personal details about everyone he worked with, and made genuine efforts to understand different perspectives. The line between professional and personal blurred gradually over several months. Strategy meetings started including dinner, then weekend coffee sessions that had nothing to do with his account. David was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in my thoughts about everything from business trends to travel dreams, and he had a way of making me feel like the most fascinating person in the room. When he asked me out officially, it felt like the natural progression of something that had been building for months. Dating David was like getting a masterclass in how relationships could work when both people brought their best selves to the table. He was thoughtful without being overwhelming, ambitious without being selfish, and supportive in ways that felt genuine rather than performative. When I mentioned wanting to learn photography, he surprised me with a weekend workshop in San Antonio. When he was stressed about investor meetings, I helped him refine his presentation strategy, and he actually implemented my suggestions. We challenged each other professionally while building something personal that felt both comfortable and exciting. Rachel visited Austin about 8 months into my relationship with David, staying for a long weekend to explore whether she might want to move back to Texas. The three of us spent Saturday exploring South by Southwest events, and I watched Rachel turn on her full charm offensive. She was at her absolute best, funny, engaging, flirtatious in the way that seemed harmless, but made every man within a 10-foot radius suddenly very interested in whatever she was saying. David was clearly charmed by her, but in the way that people are charmed by a fascinating friend of a friend, not in any way that triggered my concern. Sunday evening, as Rachel was packing to return to Nashville, she pulled me aside with an expression I had learned to recognize as her serious mode. She told me that David seemed wonderful and that she could see how happy I was, but she wanted to make sure I was being careful with my heart. It struck me as oddly protective advice coming from someone who had never been in a relationship that lasted longer than 6 months, but I appreciated the sentiment. She hugged me goodbye and said she hoped things worked out exactly the way I wanted them to. 6 months later, David proposed during a weekend trip to Marfa, West Texas. We had been hiking in Big Bend National Park when he stopped at an overlook that provided views for miles in every direction. He said that being with me had taught him what it meant to have a true partner, someone who made him want to build something bigger than himself. The ring was perfect, not the largest diamond in the world, but clearly chosen with thought and care. More importantly, his proposal included specific dreams about our future that aligned perfectly with my own goals and values. Planning our wedding became a year-long project that brought our families together in ways that felt genuinely joyful. Linda and my future mother-in-law bonded over flower arrangements and venue logistics. Robert and David's father discovered a shared passion for grilling techniques that led to several weekend barbecue experiments. Rachel flew in from Nashville multiple times to help with dress shopping and bridesmaid coordination, throwing herself into wedding planning with an enthusiasm that touched me deep. She gave a maid of honor speech at our rehearsal dinner that had everyone in tears, talking about how she had always hoped to see me find someone who appreciated how special I was. The wedding itself was everything I had dreamed of. Elegant but not pretentious, celebrating our relationship while bringing together everyone we cared about most. David's vows included promises about building our future together, supporting each other's dreams, and creating a home that would be a foundation for whatever came next. My vows focused on partnership, growth, and the excitement I felt about discovering what we could accomplish together. Dancing with him that night, surrounded by family and friends who were genuinely celebrating our happiness, I felt like I had won some kind of cosmic lottery. Our first year of marriage unfolded like a textbook example of how newlywed life could work when two people were committed to making it successful. We settled into routines that balanced our individual careers with shared goals and quality time together. David's business continued growing, requiring longer hours and occasional travel, but he made consistent efforts to prioritize our relationship and communicate about schedule changes well in advance. I was promoted to marketing director at Digital Dynamics, with a salary increase that significantly improved our financial flexibility and opened up possibilities for larger life plans. The house hunting process began during our second year of marriage, initially as weekend entertainment rather than serious shopping. We would visit open houses in different Austin neighborhoods, discussing what we liked and didn't like about various properties and architectural style. These conversations revealed that we had surprisingly aligned visions for our future home, something modern but not cold, spacious but not ostentatious, with outdoor space for entertaining and a home office setup that could accommodate both our careers. Everything changed the day we walked through the custom-built home in Westlake Hills. The property was stunning, 4,500 square feet of contemporary design with floor-to-ceiling windows, an open-concept main floor perfect for hosting, and a backyard that looked like it belonged in an architectural magazine. The master suite included a walk-in closet larger than my first apartment and a bathroom with a soaking tub, positioned to overlook the hills. The home office had built-in shelving and enough space for two people to work comfortably without getting in each other's way. David fell in love with the house immediately, walking through each room with the expression of someone who could already picture our life there. He talked about hosting dinner parties in the dining room, working on his laptop by the pool, and growing old together in a place that would always feel like a retreat from the world. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself imagining similar scenarios: holiday gatherings with our families, quiet Sunday mornings in the kitchen, future children playing in the backyard. The asking price was $8 million, which represented a significant stretch even with our combined incomes and savings. David's business was successful but still growing, with most of his wealth tied up in company equity rather than liquid assets. My salary was substantial but not quite at the level where I could comfortably afford such a large mortgage payment on my own. We spent several weeks running numbers, consulting with financial advisors, and discussing whether such a large investment made sense for our situation. The breakthrough came when I received news that my grandmother had passed away and left me a substantial inheritance. Grandmother Eleanor had been quietly accumulating wealth for decades through careful investing and property ownership, and her will revealed assets worth nearly $800,000 that would be distributed among her grandchildren. My portion, combined with my existing savings, would provide enough for a significant down payment that would make the monthly mortgage payments manageable with our combined income. David was initially hesitant about using my inheritance for our house purchase, concerned about the fairness of such an arrangement and whether it would create any imbalance in our relationship. We had several long conversations about money, ownership, and how to structure the purchase. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Purchase in a way that felt equitable to both of us. Ultimately, we decided that the house would be purchased primarily in my name, with David contributing to monthly expenses and taking on responsibility for maintenance and improvement. It felt like a practical arrangement that protected my investment while acknowledging his contributions to our shared life. The closing process took nearly 2 months, during which we spent countless hours choosing finishes, planning furniture arrangements, and dreaming about our future in the space. David threw himself into research about landscaping, home security systems, and smart home technology with the enthusiasm of someone planning to stay forever. I focused on the financial logistics, working with our mortgage broker to ensure all documentation was properly structured, and that we understood every aspect of our payment obligations and equity arrangements. Moving into the house felt like stepping into the life we had been building toward since we first met. David immediately claimed the larger home office, setting up his workstation with multiple monitors and video conferencing equipment that would allow him to work effectively from home when needed. I created a smaller but perfectly functional workspace in what had originally been designed as a sitting room, with built-in storage for my marketing materials and client files. The house was large enough that we could both work from home without feeling crowded or distracted by each other's activities. Our first few months in the new house were a honeymoon period of domestic bliss, mixed with the excitement of hosting friends and family in our beautiful space. We threw a housewarming party that became legendary among our friend group, with David grilling on our new outdoor kitchen while I coordinated a menu that showcased both our cooking skills and the house's entertaining potential. My parents visited for a weekend and were clearly proud of what we had accomplished, while David's family made plans for an extended stay during the holidays. Rachel's first visit to the house happened 6 months after we had moved in, during a long weekend when she was considering a permanent move back to Austin. Nashville hadn't worked out the way she had hoped. The event planning industry there was oversaturated, her romantic relationships had consistently failed, and she was feeling isolated from family and long-term friends. She arrived on a Thursday evening looking somewhat defeated but still carrying herself with the confidence that had always been her trademark. David and I had planned a weekend designed to show Rachel the best of Austin and help her envision what life might be like if she decided to relocate. Friday morning started with breakfast on our patio, where Rachel seemed genuinely impressed by the house and the lifestyle we had created. She complimented everything from the interior design choices to the view of the hills, asking thoughtful questions about the neighborhood and the local amenities. David gave her a full tour of the property, pointing out features and improvements with the pride of someone who considered the house a personal achievement. That evening we took Rachel to some of Austin's most popular spots: dinner at a rooftop restaurant downtown, drinks at a speakeasy in the Rainy Street district, and live music at the Continental Club. David was at his most charming, playing the role of tour guide and host with enthusiasm that seemed genuine. He made sure Rachel felt included in every conversation, asked about her experiences in Nashville, and offered helpful suggestions about Austin's job market and social scene. Watching them interact, I felt grateful to be married to someone who made such an effort to welcome my family and make them feel comfortable. Saturday brought more adventures around the city, including a visit to the South by Southwest interactive area, where David's business connections allowed us VIP access to several events. Rachel was in her element at these gatherings, networking with ease, and charming everyone she met with stories about Nashville's music scene and her event planning experience. David seemed impressed by her social skills and professional knowledge, mentioning several times how much she would thrive in Austin's creative and business community. Sunday evening, as Rachel prepared to return to Nashville, she seemed energized and optimistic in a way I hadn't seen from her in months. She thanked us repeatedly for the weekend, telling David how much she appreciated his efforts to show her around and help her understand Austin's possibilities. She pulled me aside to say that she could see why I was so happy and that David seemed like exactly the kind of partner she had always hoped I would find. Her enthusiasm about potentially moving to Austin felt genuine, and I encouraged her to seriously consider making the change. 3 weeks later, Rachel called to announce that she had decided to move back to Austin permanently. She had given notice at her Nashville job, broken her apartment lease, and made arrangements to stay with our parents temporarily, while she looked for her own place and searched for employment. The speed of her decision surprised me, but I was excited about having my sister nearby again, and looked forward to being able to spend more time together as adults living in the same city. Rachel's job search progressed more quickly than any of us had expected. Within 2 weeks of her arrival in Austin, she had landed a position as an event coordinator with a boutique marketing firm that specialized in corporate retreats and product launches. The job seemed perfect for her skills and personality, offering both creative challenges and networking opportunities that could lead to bigger things. David was particularly helpful during her transition, introducing her to several people in his professional network and offering advice about Austin's business culture and unwritten social rules. Her apartment hunt was equally successful, resulting in a lease on a stylish one-bedroom unit in the Domain area, close enough to our house for regular visits, but far enough away to maintain appropriate boundaries. David and I helped her move in, spending a Saturday assembling furniture and arranging her belongings in ways that maximized the small space. The three of us worked well together, and by evening we had transformed her empty apartment into a cozy home that reflected her personality and style. Over the following months, Rachel became a regular presence in our lives, joining us for dinner parties, weekend activities, and family gatherings with increasing frequency. She fit seamlessly into our social circle, bringing energy and humor that enhanced every gathering. David seemed to genuinely enjoy her company, often engaging her in long conversations about business trends, Austin politics, and shared interests they had discovered. Their friendship developed naturally, and I felt proud of how well my husband and sister had bonded. The warning signs, in retrospect, were subtle enough that I completely missed their significance at the time. David began working later hours and traveling more frequently for business, changes that seemed reasonable given his company's continued growth and expansion into new markets. Rachel's social media post showed her exploring Austin's nightlife with new friends, attending events and parties that looked exciting and fun. Both of them seemed to be thriving in their respective situations, and I was happy to see two people I loved finding success and satisfaction in their new circumstance. What I didn't notice was how their individual schedules had begun to align in ways that created opportunities for private time together. David's business dinners often coincided with Rachel's networking events in the same areas of the city. His weekend work sessions occasionally happened while Rachel was running errands or meeting friends nearby. The overlap seemed coincidental, and I had no reason to suspect anything other than the normal rhythms of busy people living in the same metropolitan area. The discovery that would change everything happened on a perfectly ordinary Thursday afternoon in the most mundane possible location. I was standing in the checkout line at Whole Foods on 6th Street, juggling my phone and a basket full of ingredients for the dinner party David and I were hosting that weekend, when I saw Rachel's purse sitting unattended in an abandoned shopping cart 3 lanes over. She was nowhere in sight, probably distracted by some organic skincare display or caught up in conversation with someone she had recognized from her networking circle. The purse was expensive, a designer bag she had splurged on during her first month at the new job, and leaving it unguarded in downtown Austin seemed unlike her usual careful nature. I walked over to grab it, planning to text her about its location, when the zipper had come partially undone, and I could see contents spilling out onto the cart's metal mesh. As I reached to steady the bag and zip it closed, several items tumbled onto the floor around my feet. Bending to collect them, my hand closed around something that made my heart stop completely. David's wedding ring was sitting there among Rachel's lip gloss and breath mints, the custom engraving we had chosen together clearly visible on the inner band. For several seconds, I couldn't process what I was seeing. The ring should have been on David's finger, where it belonged, where it had been every single day since our wedding ceremony 2 years early. David never removed his ring, not for working out, not for cooking, not even when he was doing home improvement projects that might damage it. He had told me repeatedly that wearing it made him feel connected to me throughout the day, especially during business trips when we were apart. I stood there in the middle of Whole Foods, holding my husband's wedding ring while trying to understand how it had ended up in my sister's purse. The rational part of my mind scrambled for innocent explanations. Maybe David had asked Rachel to take it to a jeweler for cleaning or repair. Maybe it had fallen off somewhere and Rachel had found it, planning to return it as a surprise. Maybe there was some perfectly reasonable explanation that would make sense once I had more information. But even as I tried to convince myself there could be innocent reasons, other details were clicking into place with sickening clarity. Rachel had been acting slightly different lately, more secretive about her social plans and less forthcoming about how she spent her evening. David had been working late more frequently, often calling to say he would be home much later than expected. Their text exchanges, which I had occasionally glimpsed when David's phone was nearby, seemed to have become more frequent and longer than necessary for casual friendship. I dropped the ring back into Rachel's purse along with the other scattered items, zipped it closed, and placed it carefully back in the shopping cart. My hands were shaking as I returned to my own checkout line, mechanically going through the motions of paying for groceries while my mind raced through recent interactions and conversation. Every innocent moment between David and Rachel suddenly took on a different meaning, every friendly exchange now seeming loaded with hidden significance I had been too trusting to recognize. The drive home felt like an out-of-body experience. I kept checking my rearview mirror, convinced that other drivers could somehow see the devastation written across my face. The familiar streets of Austin looked different, as if the discovery of that ring had altered my perception of everything around me. The city where David and I had built our life together, where we had planned our future, now felt like a place where my marriage was disintegrating without my knowledge. Walking into our beautiful house, I was struck by how normal everything looked. David's coffee mug was still sitting on the kitchen counter from the morning. My marketing materials were spread across the dining room table where I had left them. Our wedding photos smiled down from the mantel with the same happiness they had displayed yesterday. Nothing had changed in the physical space, but everything felt different because I now knew something I wished I could unknow. I called David's office, needing to hear his voice and hoping that somehow hearing him would restore my sense of normalcy. His assistant told me he was in meetings all afternoon and wouldn't be available until late evening. I texted him asking what time he expected to be home and received a response 2 hours later saying he had unexpected client dinners and wouldn't be back until after 10. The delay in his response, which I had never questioned before, now felt suspicious and calculated. Rachel called me that evening around 7, her voice bright and cheerful as she asked about weekend plans and whether I needed help with anything for the dinner party. I listened to her talk about her day at work, her plans for the evening, and her excitement about some new Austin restaurant she wanted to try, all while knowing that my husband's wedding ring was sitting in her purse. Her voice sounded exactly the same as always, carrying no hint of guilt or deception, which somehow made the betrayal feel even more complete. That night, when David finally came home after 11, I watched him carefully as he went through his usual routine of hanging up his jacket and checking his phone. He kissed me hello with the same warmth he had shown for months, asked about my day with apparent genuine interest, and told me about his client meetings with details that sounded convincing and consistent. If I hadn't found the ring, nothing about his behavior would have raised any red flags whatsoever, but when he washed his hands at the kitchen sink, I could see his ring finger was pale where his wedding band should have been. The tan line was clearly visible, proving the ring had been missing for more than just a few hours. When I casually asked about it, David looked down at his hand with an expression of surprise that seemed performative rather than genuine. He told me the band had been bothering him lately, feeling tight and uncomfortable, so he had taken it off during his workout that morning and forgotten to put it back on. The explanation sounded reasonable enough that I might have accepted it under normal circumstances, but I knew the ring wasn't sitting in his gym bag or on his dresser. It was in Rachel's purse, and there was no innocent reason for that particular combination of facts. I smiled and nodded, telling him I understood about jewelry becoming uncomfortable, while internally processing the reality that my husband was lying directly to my face with impressive ease and conviction. Sleep that night was impossible. I lay next to David, listening to his peaceful breathing and trying to reconcile the man I had married with someone who could deceive me so completely. Every shared memory from the past few months took on a different cast when viewed through the lens of betrayal. Romantic dinners where David had seemed distracted weren't about work stress, they were about another woman. Business trips that had lasted longer than expected weren't about complicated client negotiations, they were about stolen time with my sister. The next morning I made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before confronting either David or Rachel. If my suspicions were correct, I wanted to know exactly how long the betrayal had been going on, how serious it was, and what my options were for protecting myself both emotionally and financially. If I was wrong, which some part of me still hoped was possible, I wanted to avoid damaging relationships based on misunderstandings or circumstantial evidence. I started by paying attention to details I had previously ignored. David's phone habits, which had always been casual and open, had become more protective recently. He now took his phone with him into the bathroom, kept it face down during dinner, and seemed to clear his notifications more frequently than necessary. His schedule, which had been predictable for most of our marriage, had become increasingly flexible and subject to last-minute changes that always seemed to benefit his availability during evening hours. Rachel's behavior patterns were equally revealing once I knew what to look for. Her social media posts, which had always been frequent and detailed about her activities, had become more vague about locations and companions. Photos from restaurants and events were cropped to exclude other people, and her captions focused on the venues rather than the company. Her availability for family dinners and weekend activities had decreased, always with explanations about work events or plans with new friends whose names she mentioned but never described in detail. Their individual deceptions were sophisticated enough that I might never have noticed them separately, but together they created a pattern that became obvious once I understood what I was seeing. David's unexpected work dinners consistently happened on evenings when Rachel posted photos from upscale restaurants. His weekend business meetings coincided with Rachel's mysterious social plans that she described only in general terms. Their separate lies were choreographed to create alibis for shared time together. The confirmation I had been dreading came the following week, when I decided to drive past the Continental Club on a Thursday evening after David had told me he was having dinner with potential investors. Rachel had mentioned earlier that day that she was meeting friends for drinks, but had been vague about the location. I told myself I was just driving through the area for legitimate reasons, but the truth was that I needed to see for myself what was really happening. David's car was parked in the small lot behind the club, and through the window I could see him and Rachel sitting close together at a corner table, engaged in intimate conversation that looked nothing like casual friendship. They were holding hands across the table, leaning into each other's space in ways that spoke of physical familiarity and emotional connection. Rachel was wearing the dress she had borrowed from my closet the week before, claiming she needed something special for a work event. Watching them together, I felt the last of my denial crumble away. This wasn't a new development or a moment of weakness that could be forgiven and forgotten. Their body language spoke of a relationship that had been developing over time, with inside jokes and shared secrets, and the kind of comfort that comes from spending significant amounts of time together. They looked happy in a way that felt like a punch to my stomach, genuinely enjoying each other's company without any visible guilt or concern about the devastation their happiness was causing. I drove home in a state of numbness that felt like protection against the full emotional impact of what I had witnessed. The betrayal was now undeniable, but I wasn't ready to feel the complete weight of it yet. Instead, I focused on practical considerations about what would happen next, and how I could protect myself from the worst possible outcomes. My marriage was over, even if David and Rachel didn't know I knew that yet, and I needed to start making decisions based on that reality. That weekend's dinner party became a surreal exercise in pretending everything was normal while my world fell apart internally. David played the perfect host, charming our guests and making sure everyone felt welcome and entertained. Rachel arrived with a bottle of wine and a bright smile, complimenting the food and engaging in animated conversations with our friends, as if she hadn't been systematically destroying my marriage for months. Watching them interact in our home, carefully maintaining appropriate distance and casual familiarity, I realized how skilled they had become at deception. They never looked at each other too long, never stood too close, never exchanged the kind of loaded glances that might have given them away to observant friends. Their performance was flawless, which told me they had been practicing this act for far longer than I had imagined. Our friend Kelly Martinez, who lived 2 houses down and had become one of my closest confidants since we moved to the neighborhood, pulled me aside during the party to tell me how lucky I was to have such a wonderful family. She mentioned how sweet it was that David and Rachel had become such good friends, and how nice it must be for me to see my husband and sister getting along so well. Her innocent observation felt like another layer of betrayal, knowing that our friends were being deceived just as thoroughly as I had. The party ended with David and Rachel volunteering to clean up together while I relaxed with a glass of wine, supposedly as a treat for all my hard work organizing the evening. I watched them work side by side in our kitchen, efficient and comfortable with each other's movements in ways that suggested they had spent considerable time in domestic settings together. When Rachel reached around David to put dishes in the dishwasher, there was a brief moment of physical contact that lasted just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. After Rachel left that night, David was particularly affectionate, telling me what a wonderful evening it had been and how proud he was of the life we had built together. He held me close as we got ready for bed, thanking me for being such an amazing wife and partner. His words felt like acid, not because they were insincere but because they highlighted the enormous gap between the man I had married and the man who was currently betraying me with my own sister. The following Monday, I made an appointment with Amanda Rodriguez, a real estate attorney whose name had come up during our home buying process. I told her I needed to understand the legal implications of our property ownership structure and what my options would be if my marriage ended. Amanda was professional and discreet, asking pointed questions about our financial arrangements without making me feel judged or pressured to share more personal details than necessary. The news Amanda gave me was better than I had dared to hope. Because the house had been purchased primarily with my inheritance money, and the mortgage was structured with me as the primary borrower, I had significant legal protections that would be difficult for David to challenge. The documentation we had signed during closing clearly established my ownership stake, and Texas property laws would generally favor my financial contributions over David's residential claim. More importantly, Amanda explained that if David chose to leave the marriage voluntarily, he would have very limited ability to claim ongoing ownership rights or force a sale of the property. The mortgage payments, property taxes, and maintenance costs would become my sole responsibility, but I would also have complete control over the asset and any future appreciation in its value. David's name on some of the paperwork gave him certain legal rights, but those rights were secondary to my documented financial investment and primary borrower status. Amanda also connected me with Michael Chen, a financial advisor who specialized in helping people protect their assets during difficult life transitions. Michael reviewed our joint accounts, investment portfolios, and insurance policies, helping me understand which assets were protected by law and which ones I needed to take immediate action to secure. His advice was practical and focused on minimizing financial damage rather than maximizing revenge, which appealed to my natural tendency towards strategic thinking. The picture that emerged from these consultations was that I was in a much stronger position than many people facing similar betrayal. My career provided sufficient income to maintain our lifestyle independently. My ownership stake in our home was legally secure, and our financial arrangements had been structured in ways that protected my individual interests even within the marriage. David had benefited significantly from our relationship, but he had not become entitled to assets he hadn't contributed to acquiring. Armed with this knowledge, I began making subtle changes to protect myself financially while I decided how to handle the personal aspects of the betrayal. I opened individual accounts at a different bank, gradually transferring money that was unquestionably mine based on its sources and our previous agreements. I updated beneficiaries on life insurance policies and retirement accounts, removing David's automatic inheritance right. I secured personal documents and sentimental items that would be difficult to replace if they became casualties of a contentious divorce. Each protective step I took felt like a small act of reclaiming control over my life and future. David and Rachel had chosen to betray me, but they hadn't chosen the consequences of their actions. I was going to make sure those consequences reflected the reality of what they had done and the value of what they were losing. They wanted to be together, and I was going to make sure they got exactly what they were asking for, along with everything that came with it. The transformation in my perspective was gradual but profound. Instead of feeling like a victim of their deception, I began to feel like someone who had been given valuable information about people's true characters before making any irreversible mistake. David and Rachel had shown me exactly who they were when they thought no one was watching, and I was grateful to know the truth before wasting more years on relationships that were built on lies. My work became a refuge during this period, providing structure and purpose while my personal life underwent seismic shift. Digital Dynamics was in the middle of several major campaigns, and throwing myself into client projects gave me an outlet for my energy and a reminder of my professional competence and value. My colleagues noticed my increased focus and dedication, leading to expanded responsibilities and recognition that felt like confirmation of my worth independent of my merit. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my personal relationships were falling apart, my professional reputation was reaching new heights. I was building something meaningful and lasting through my own efforts and talents, while David and Rachel were destroying relationships and trust for the sake of stolen moments and secret meetings. Their choices were making them smaller and more deceptive, while my response was making me stronger and more independent. The evening I decided to stop pretending everything was normal came after David told me he would be working late again. The fourth time that week he had found reasons to avoid coming home for dinner. I called his office after business hours and spoke with the night security guard, who confirmed that David's car wasn't in the parking garage, and that most of the building had been empty since 6 o'clock. The casual nature of his lie, delivered without hesitation or apparent guilt, crystallized my understanding that our marriage was already over in every way that mattered. Rachel texted me that same evening, asking if I wanted to meet for lunch the next day to discuss plans for our mother's upcoming birthday celebration. Her message was warm and sisterly, full of enthusiasm about creating a special day for Linda and suggestions for gifts and activities. Reading her words, knowing that she was probably with David at that very moment, I felt the last of my emotional attachment to our sibling relationship dissolve into something harder and more resolved. I had spent enough time gathering information and protecting myself financially. Now it was time to decide exactly how I wanted to handle the confrontation that would end my marriage and transform my relationship with my family forever. David and Rachel thought they were managing a secret that gave them power over my emotions and future. They were about to discover that knowledge worked both ways, and that the person with the most to lose wasn't necessarily the person who would lose the most. The pattern of deception had become so normalized that I almost admired the sophistication of their coordination. David would mention needing to attend a networking event for Austin tech entrepreneurs, while Rachel would simultaneously post Instagram stories about exploring new downtown venues with mysterious friends who never seemed to have names or faces. Their lies had evolved into an intricate dance of misdirection that required genuine effort and planning to maintain. What made their betrayal particularly insidious was how they had weaponized my own trust and generosity against me. When David asked to use my car for a weekend business trip because his was having transmission problems, I handed over the keys without question. When Rachel needed to borrow my designer dress for what she claimed was an important work function, I encouraged her to take whatever she wanted from my closet. They were using my resources to facilitate their affair while looking me in the eye and accepting my help with expressions of grateful appreciation. The financial implications of their deception were becoming clearer as I paid closer attention to our spending pattern. David's business dinner expenses had increased dramatically over the past 6 months, with receipts showing meals for two at romantic restaurants that seemed inappropriate for client meetings. His travel expenses included hotel charges in cities where he claimed to have day-long meetings, suggesting overnight stays that had never been mentioned in our conversations about his work schedule. Credit card statements revealed charges at jewelry stores, florists, and boutique shops that David had never mentioned and whose purchases had never appeared in our home. When I asked casually about a $300 charge at a high-end lingerie boutique, David claimed it was a mistake that would be reversed, but the charge remained on our account for weeks afterward. The financial evidence painted a picture of a man who was spending our money to court another woman while maintaining the facade of a devoted husband. Rachel's sudden financial stability also raised questions I should have asked months earlier. Her new job paid well but not well enough to support the lifestyle she had been maintaining since moving to Austin. Designer handbags, expensive dinners, weekend trips to surrounding cities, and a wardrobe that seemed to expand weekly all suggested income sources beyond her legitimate employment. When I complimented her on a beautiful necklace she was wearing during one of our family dinners, she became evasive about where she had acquired it, claiming it was a gift from a friend she preferred not to discuss. The most painful realization was understanding how they had manipulated our family gatherings to facilitate their relationship. Sunday dinners at our parents' house, which had always been sacred family time, had become opportunities for David and Rachel to be in the same space without raising suspicions about their connection. They would arrive separately, maintain appropriate distance during the meal, but find excuses to step outside together, or volunteer for kitchen duties that gave them private conversation time. Our parents had been unknowing accomplices to the affair, frequently commenting on how wonderful it was that David and Rachel had developed such a close friendship. Linda would beam with maternal pride when David offered to help Rachel with apartment hunting or job networking, praising him for being such a supportive brother-in-law. Robert would joke about gaining a son and keeping a daughter when Rachel moved back to Austin, not realizing that his words described a more literal situation than he intended. The manipulation extended to our shared friend groups, who had been carefully trained to accept David and Rachel's frequent presence in each other's company as natural family closeness. At parties and social gatherings, they would work the room separately but reconvene periodically for conversations that looked like casual family interaction to outside observers. Their public behavior was so carefully calibrated that our friends saw exactly what David and Rachel wanted them to see while remaining completely unaware of the deception happening in plain sight. Kelly Martinez, my neighbor and closest friend in our Westlake Hills community, had become an unwitting source of information about David and Rachel's activity. During our regular morning walks, she would mention seeing David's car in unusual places around Austin or running into Rachel at restaurants and events where she claimed to be with work colleagues. Kelly's innocent observations were puzzle pieces that helped me understand the scope of their coordination and the frequency of their secret meetings. The breaking point came when I discovered they had been using our house for their affair during my business trip. I had traveled to Dallas for a 3-day marketing conference, trusting David to maintain our home and handle his work responsibility. Rachel had posted social media updates suggesting she was spending the weekend with college friends who were visiting Austin, providing her with an alibi for being unavailable to family and friends. Returning home a day early due to a canceled workshop session, I found evidence that made denial impossible. Rachel's car was parked in our garage, hidden from view of neighbors or casual passers. Her overnight bag was sitting on the chair in our master bedroom, and personal items were scattered throughout the house in ways that suggested comfortable familiarity with the space. The bed sheets were different from the ones I had left on our bed, and the laundry room contained evidence of hasty cleaning attempts. David and Rachel were nowhere to be found when I arrived, but their absence felt more incriminating than their presence would have been. They had clearly been staying in our house together, sleeping in our bed, and using our private space for their relationship while I was traveling for work. The violation felt complete and irreversible, transforming our beautiful home into a crime scene of emotional destruction. I spent that afternoon documenting everything I found, taking photographs of Rachel's belongings, and making notes about the condition of various rooms. The evidence wouldn't be admissible in any legal proceeding, but it provided confirmation of what I had suspected and eliminated any remaining doubt about the nature of their relationship. They weren't having an emotional affair or struggling with temptation they couldn't resist. They were conducting a full relationship that included domestic intimacy in the space I had created for my marriage. When David and Rachel returned that evening, apparently having received notification that I was home early, their surprise seemed genuine, but their explanations felt rehearsed. Rachel claimed she had stopped by to water plants while I was away and had decided to stay overnight rather than drive home late after having wine with dinner. David supported her story, adding details about inviting her to stay when he returned from his own business meetings, and found her already there. Their coordination was flawless, but the story had obvious holes that revealed its fictional nature. Rachel had no key to our house, so David would have had to let her in initially. Her overnight bag suggested planned accommodation rather than spontaneous plant water. Most damning, David's claimed business meetings had supposedly kept him out until late evening, but his car showed evidence of recent long-distance driving that was inconsistent with local client visits. Standing in our kitchen, listening to them lie with such conviction and apparent sincerity, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The last vestiges of hope that I might be misunderstanding the situation or overreacting to innocent coincidences evaporated completely. David and Rachel had chosen to betray me in the most intimate and hurtful way possible, using my own home as the setting for their affair, while crafting elaborate deceptions to maintain their access to my trust and resources. That night, after Rachel left and David settled into his normal routine, I made the decision to accelerate my timeline for confronting the situation. I had gathered sufficient evidence to understand the scope of their betrayal, consulted with professionals to protect my legal and financial interests, and confirmed that my suspicions were completely accurate. Prolonging the deception served no purpose except to give David and Rachel more time to deepen their relationship and potentially make decisions that would complicate the resolution process. I scheduled a meeting with Thomas Bradley, the divorce attorney Amanda Rodriguez had recommended, for the following week. Thomas specialized in high-asset divorces and had extensive experience helping clients navigate complex property and financial arrangements. His initial consultation would help me understand my options for ending the marriage, while protecting my interests and minimizing the potential for prolonged legal battles. The conversation with Thomas was both illuminating and empowering. Texas was a no-fault divorce state, meaning I wouldn't need to prove adultery to end the marriage, but the evidence I had gathered could be relevant for property division and spousal support decisions. More importantly, the prenuptial agreement David and I had signed before our wedding, which had seemed unnecessary at the time, included specific provisions that would protect my premarital assets and inheritance-funded purchases. Thomas explained that David's voluntary abandonment of the marriage through his affair would significantly strengthen my position in any legal proceeding. If David chose to leave our home to be with Rachel, he would be demonstrating his preference for ending our marriage, which would complicate any later claims about being forced out or denied access to marital property. The key was documenting his choices and ensuring that his departure appeared voluntary rather than coerced. The strategy Thomas recommended was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than confronting David and Rachel immediately, I would create circumstances that forced them to make their relationship choice publicly and definitively. Once their affair became undeniable to our families and social circle, David would face pressure to either end the relationship with Rachel or leave our marriage. Given the evidence of their emotional investment in each other, Thomas predicted they would choose to be together openly rather than return to deception and secrecy. Implementing this strategy required careful planning and impeccable timing. I needed to expose their relationship in a way that appeared accidental rather than vindictive, allowing them to believe they were making independent choices rather than responding to manipulation. The exposure had to be complete enough that denial would be impossible but subtle enough that I could maintain plausible deniability about my knowledge and intention. The opportunity presented itself during our annual 4th of July party, a tradition David and I had established during our second year of marriage. The celebration had grown each year, becoming a significant social event that brought together our family, friends, neighbors, and professional colleagues for an afternoon of barbecue, pool activities, and fireworks viewing from our backyard. This year's guest list included nearly 50 people, creating the perfect audience for the kind of public revelation that would make private denial impossible. Rachel had volunteered to help with party planning and preparation, offering to coordinate decorations and manage the food service logistics. Her enthusiasm for the event seemed genuine, and I encouraged her involvement while carefully monitoring how she and David interacted during the planning process. Their collaboration was efficient and comfortable, suggesting they had worked together on similar projects before, which provided additional confirmation of their established relationship. The party preparations became an exercise in strategic positioning and careful observation. I documented every interaction between David and Rachel, noting when they spoke privately, how they divided responsibilities, and what kind of nonverbal communication passed between them. Their behavior was professional and appropriate when others were present, but the ease of their partnership was obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. 3 days before the party, I made a discovery that provided the perfect opportunity for orchestrating their exposure. While organizing David's home office to make space for party supplies, I found a hotel receipt tucked inside a business folder. The receipt was from the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Austin, documenting a 2-night stay that had occurred during a weekend when David claimed to be attending a business conference in Houston. The dates coincided with a period when Rachel had told our family she was visiting college friends in San Antonio. The hotel receipt was significant, not just because it proved David had lied about his location, but because it represented the kind of expensive, romantic gesture that spoke to serious emotional investment rather than casual physical attraction. The Four Seasons was the most luxurious hotel in Austin, the kind of place where people went to celebrate anniversaries or special occasions. David had never taken me there, claiming it was overpriced and pretentious, but he had apparently found it perfectly appropriate for his time with Rachel. I made copies of the receipt and began developing a plan that would use this evidence to maximum effect during the party. The key was timing the revelation, so that David and Rachel couldn't coordinate their responses or develop a unified strategy for damage control. I needed them to be separated when the truth came out, preferably in front of witnesses, who would remember their individual reactions and make private coordination impossible. The 4th of July party began exactly as planned, with guests arriving throughout the afternoon and settling into the relaxed social atmosphere David and I had perfected over the year. The weather was perfect, the food was excellent, and the company was engaging in ways that reminded me why these gatherings had become such an important tradition. For a few hours I was able to enjoy the fruits of our hospitality and temporarily forget about the underlying deception that was about to be exposed. David was in his element as host, moving between groups of guests with easy charm and ensuring everyone felt welcome and entertained. He manned the grill with scientific precision, coordinated pool activities for the children in attendance, and engaged in political discussions with our more opinionated friends, without allowing any conversations to become heated or divisive. Watching him perform as the perfect husband and host, I felt a complex mixture of admiration for his social skills and disgust for his moral flexibility. Rachel arrived fashionably late,
making an entrance that commanded attention without appearing calculated or attention-seeking. She had chosen her outfit carefully, wearing a sundress that was appropriate for the casual party atmosphere but flattering enough to ensure she looked stunning in the inevitable photograph. Her greeting to David was warm but brief, exactly the kind of interaction that would be expected between a sister-in-law and host, but I caught the subtle eye contact that suggested deeper communication. The afternoon progressed with the kind of social momentum that made successful parties feel effortless and organic. Guests mingled freely, moving between the pool area, outdoor kitchen, and various seating arrangements we had created throughout the backyard. Children played games while adults engaged in conversations about work, politics, travel plans, and local Austin developments. The atmosphere was festive and relaxed, creating the perfect setting for the drama that was about to unfold. As the sun began to set and guests started gathering for the fireworks display, I initiated the sequence of events that would expose David and Rachel's affair to our entire social circle. The plan required precise timing and careful coordination, but the groundwork had been laid throughout the afternoon through strategic conversations and subtle positioning of key witnesses. The revelation began innocently enough, with me mentioning to a group of friends that I had found some receipts while organizing David's office and wanted to ask him about business expenses for tax purposes.
I produced the Four Seasons receipt casually, holding it up so that several people could see the hotel name and dates while I called across the yard to get David's attention about the business conference he had supposedly attended that weekend. David's reaction was immediate and telling. His face went pale when he saw the receipt, and his eyes darted quickly to Rachel's location across the yard before returning to me with an expression of barely controlled panic. He walked over to our group with movements that seemed forced and unnatural, clearly trying to buy time to formulate an explanation for documentation that contradicted his previous claims about his activities that weekend. The conversation that followed was excruciating and enlightening in equal measure. David's attempts to explain the receipt became increasingly desperate and incoherent as he realized that any story he invented would need to account for verifiable details that could be checked later. He claimed there had been a last-minute change in conference location, then suggested he had stayed in Austin for follow-up meetings, then tried to argue that the receipt belonged to someone else entirely. Rachel, who had been drawn into the conversation by the obvious tension and David's panicked glances in her direction, made the fatal mistake of trying to support his explanations with additional details. She mentioned that she had seen David in Austin that weekend, supposedly by coincidence, which contradicted her previous claims about being in San Antonio. When pressed for specifics about where and when this encounter had occurred, her story began to unravel as quickly as David's had. The group of friends around us grew larger as other party guests sensed drama and gravitated toward the conversation. Kelly Martinez, who had become increasingly protective of me over the months as she witnessed what she now understood were signs of marital problems, asked pointed questions that made it clear she suspected something more significant than business expense. Confusion. Other friends began sharing their own observations about seeing David and Rachel in places and circumstances that contradicted their official story. The moment of complete exposure came when Linda and Robert, who had been listening to the conversation with growing confusion and concern, demanded to know why both David and Rachel had been lying to the family about their weekend activity. The direct question from our parents eliminated any possibility of maintaining the deception, as continued lying would require David and Rachel to coordinate their stories in real time while surrounded by witnesses who were now actively skeptical of everything they said. David cracked first, his composure finally breaking under the combined pressure of my evidence, our friends' questions, and our parents' direct confrontation. He admitted that he and Rachel had been spending time together that they had kept private, but he tried to minimize the significance by characterizing their relationship as a close friendship that others might misunderstand. His explanation was pathetic and unconvincing, satisfying no one, and raising more questions than it answered. Rachel's confession was more complete and devastating, perhaps feeling that continued deception was impossible, or recognizing that partial truth would be worse than complete honesty. She admitted that she and David had fallen in love and had been having an affair for several months. Her words fell into the sudden silence of our backyard like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and disbelief that spread throughout the gathered crowd. The immediate aftermath was chaos as our friends and family tried to process what they had just learned and decide how to respond to such a public revelation. Some guests began making excuses to leave early, clearly uncomfortable being present for such intimate family drama. Others lingered either from morbid curiosity or genuine concern for the various people involved. Linda burst into tears. Robert became visibly angry, and Kelly positioned herself protectively beside me as if expecting physical confrontation. For my part, I felt surprisingly calm and detached from the emotional storm swirling around me. The revelation was unfolding exactly as I had hoped, with David and Rachel exposed as liars and adulterers in front of the people whose opinions mattered most to them. Their relationship was now public knowledge, making it impossible for them to return to secrecy and deception. They would have to choose between ending their affair or ending their relationships with me and our family. The silence that followed Rachel's confession stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I watched David's face cycle through emotions like a broken slideshow: panic, anger, resignation, and finally something that looked almost like relief. He had been carrying the weight of deception for months, and having it exposed, even in such a devastating way, seemed to lift some invisible burden from his shoulder. Linda was the first to break the silence, her voice shaking with a combination of heartbreak and fury that I had never heard from my mother before. She demanded to know how long the affair had been going on, whether they had planned this betrayal, and what they expected to happen now that everyone knew the truth. Her questions came rapid-fire, each one landing like a physical blow on both David and Rachel, who stood frozen in the center of our beautiful backyard, surrounded by the wreckage of their carefully constructed lies. Robert's reaction was more controlled but equally devastating. He looked directly at David and told him that he had welcomed him into our family as a son, trusted him with his daughter's happiness, and considered him one of the most honorable men he had ever known. The disappointment in his voice was crushing, and I could see David flinch with each word as if he were being physically struck. Then, Robert turned to Rachel and said simply that he didn't recognize the woman standing before him, and needed time to understand what had happened to the daughter he thought he knew. Our friends began extracting themselves from the situation with varying degrees of awkwardness and efficiency. Some approached me with expressions of support and sympathy, offering help or simply expressing their shock at what they had witnessed. Others avoided eye contact entirely, gathering their belongings quickly and leaving without saying goodbye to anyone. Kelly remained firmly planted beside me, her protective presence providing both physical and emotional support as the social fabric of the party disintegrated around us. The most painful moment came when little Emma Rodriguez, the 7-year-old daughter of our neighbors, asked her mother why everyone was crying and whether the fireworks were still going to happen. Her innocent question highlighted how thoroughly David and Rachel's selfishness had contaminated what should have been a joyful celebration, turning a cherished family tradition into a scene of devastation that would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. David finally found his voice and attempted to salvage something from the wreckage by suggesting that we all move inside to discuss the situation privately. His proposal was met with skeptical stares from everyone present, as if the time for private conversations and damage control had passed the moment he chose to conduct an affair with my sister. Rachel nodded eagerly at his suggestion, apparently still believing that the right combination of words and explanations could somehow minimize the consequences of their action. I declined their invitation for private discussion, stating clearly that I had no interest in hearing excuses, justifications, or plans for how they intended to manage their relationship going forward. My calm response seemed to surprise everyone, including David and Rachel, who had apparently expected me to be more emotional or volatile in my reaction to their betrayal. Instead, I told them that their affair had clarified several important things for me and that I would be making decisions based on that clarity rather than on whatever explanations they might offer. The remaining party guests departed quickly after that, leaving our immediate family standing in clusters around the backyard like survivors of some natural disaster. Linda and Robert huddled together near the pool, speaking in low, urgent voices about how to process what they had learned about their daughters. Kelly helped me begin cleaning up the remnants of what had been a beautiful party, her presence providing welcome distraction from the emotional carnage surrounding us. David approached me as I was collecting abandoned plates and cups, his voice tentative as he asked if we could speak privately about next steps and how to handle the situation moving forward. I told him that the only conversation we needed to have would involve lawyers and that he should make arrangements to stay elsewhere while we sorted out the legal aspects of ending our marriage. His face registered genuine shock at my matter-of-fact tone, as if he had expected anger or pleading rather than calm decisiveness. Rachel made her own attempt at reconciliation, following me into the kitchen where I was loading the dishwasher with mechanical precision. She began with an apology that sounded rehearsed and insincere, acknowledging that the affair was wrong but attempting to explain it as something that had simply happened, despite their best efforts to resist. Her explanation was insulting in its assumption that I would accept their lack of self-control as justification for months of deliberate deception and betrayal. When I didn't respond to her initial apology, Rachel escalated to emotional manipulation, crying as she told me that she never intended to hurt me and that her relationship with David had developed naturally despite their attempts to maintain appropriate boundaries. She claimed that they had tried to end things multiple times, but found themselves unable to deny their feelings for each other. Her tears felt performative rather than genuine, designed to elicit sympathy rather than express authentic remorse. I finally turned to face Rachel directly and told her that her explanation confirmed my understanding of the situation and my decisions about how to proceed. She and David were clearly committed to their relationship despite the cost to other people, and I respected their choice enough to remove myself as an obstacle to their happiness. My calm acceptance of their affair seemed to unsettle Rachel more than anger would have, and her crying intensified as she realized that her emotional appeal was falling on deaf ears. The conversation ended when I informed Rachel that she needed to leave our house immediately and that future communication between us would be handled through intermediaries until our family situation stabilized. She protested that we were sisters and that family relationships were more important than romantic ones, but her argument rang hollow given her choices over the previous month. I walked her to the front door and stood watching as she gathered her belongings from various rooms, ensuring that she didn't take anything that belonged to David or me. David made one final attempt at damage control as Rachel was leaving, suggesting that the three of us could work together to find a solution that honored everyone's feelings and minimized harm to our family. His proposal was breathtakingly naive, revealing a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation's reality and the permanence of the choices he and Rachel had made. I told him that the solution was simple: they could be together without any interference from me, but that would require ending our marriage and accepting the consequences of their decision. That night, after David had reluctantly agreed to stay at a hotel while we figured out next steps, I sat alone in our beautiful house and felt something I hadn't expected: relief. The months of suspicion, investigation, and strategic planning were over, replaced by clarity about the future and certainty about the steps I needed to take. David and Rachel had shown me exactly who they were when they thought no one was watching, and I was grateful to have that information before wasting more time on relationships built on deception. The following week brought a whirlwind of legal consultations, financial planning sessions, and difficult conversations with family and friends about how to move forward. Thomas Bradley proved to be exactly the kind of strategic advocate I needed, focused on protecting my interests while avoiding unnecessary conflict or prolonged proceeding. His approach was efficient and thorough, designed to finalize our divorce quickly while ensuring that David's departure from our marriage was clearly documented as voluntary. The property settlement was remarkably straightforward thanks to the prenuptial agreement and the clear documentation of my financial contributions to our major asset. David would be responsible for half of our joint debts, but would have no claim on the house, which had been purchased primarily with my inheritance and remained titled in my name. His belongings could be retrieved under supervision, but he would need to find alternative housing immediately, since he had chosen to end our marriage through his affair. More challenging was the mortgage situation, which had been structured with both our names despite my primary financial responsibility. Thomas worked with our lender to modify the loan terms, removing David as a co-borrower, and adjusting the payment schedule to reflect my individual income and creditworthiness. The process required extensive documentation of our financial arrangements and David's voluntary departure from the marriage, but the lender was cooperative once they understood the circumstance. David's reaction to the divorce terms was a mixture of surprise and indignation that revealed how little he had considered the practical consequences of his affair. He seemed to have assumed that our shared history and his emotional attachment to our house would translate into ongoing financial rights and residential privileges. The reality that his infidelity had forfeited those claims was apparently something he hadn't fully considered during his months of deception with Rachel. His attorney attempted to negotiate more favorable terms, arguing that David had contributed to the household through maintenance work and utilities payments that justified some ownership stake in our property. Thomas demolished these arguments efficiently, presenting documentation that showed David's contributions were minimal compared to my mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance costs, and major home improvement. The prenuptial agreement we had signed specifically addressed such situations, protecting premarital assets and inherited funds from claims based on minor financial contribution. The most satisfying aspect of the legal proceedings was watching David realize the full scope of his financial exposure. Without access to my income, he would be responsible for his portion of our joint debts, while establishing entirely new housing arrangements and covering the significant costs of divorce proceedings. His business income, which had always seemed substantial when combined with my salary, would be stretched to accommodate expenses that had previously been shared between us. Rachel's situation was equally challenging, though she seemed less aware of the practical implications of her choices. Her job provided sufficient income for independent living, but not for the luxury lifestyle she had been maintaining with David's financial support. The expensive dinners, designer clothing, weekend trips, and high-end apartment that had characterized her Austin experience would need to be scaled back significantly if she wanted to maintain financial independence. The social consequences of their affair were immediate and severe. Our friend group, which had been carefully cultivated over years of shared experiences and mutual support, fractured along predictable lines. Some people remained neutral, attempting to maintain relationships with both sides, while avoiding taking positions on the affair itself. Others made clear choices about whose behavior they found acceptable, with the majority expressing support for me and disapproval of David and Rachel's action. Kelly Martinez became my closest ally during this period, offering both practical support and emotional encouragement as I navigated the complexities of ending my marriage. Her perspective as someone who had witnessed David and Rachel's deception firsthand was invaluable, providing confirmation that my suspicions had been justified and my responses were appropriate. She helped me understand that the affair had been obvious to careful observers, making me feel less foolish for having trusted people who were systematically betraying me. The impact on our families was devastating and long-lasting. Linda and Robert struggled to reconcile their image of Rachel as their beloved younger daughter with her behavior as an adulteress who had destroyed her sister's marriage. Their disappointment was profound and complicated by guilt about their own failure to recognize the signs of the affair despite spending significant time with both David and Rachel over the months it was developing. Linda's relationship with Rachel became particularly strained as she grappled with feelings of responsibility for raising a daughter capable of such betrayal. She questioned every parenting decision and family value they had tried to instill, wondering where they had failed to teach Rachel about loyalty, honesty, and respect for family relationships. Her pain was evident during our conversations, and I found myself comforting her while dealing with my own grief about the loss of my marriage and my relationship with my sister. Robert's response was more direct and decisive. He told Rachel that her choices had consequences that extended beyond her romantic relationship with David, and that she would need to rebuild trust with every family member who had been affected by her deception. He made it clear that while she would always be his daughter, her welcome in the family home would be contingent on genuine accountability for her actions and respect for the boundaries I needed to establish for my own healing. David's relationship with my parents ended abruptly and completely. They had genuinely loved him as a son-in-law and had invested emotional energy in building a relationship that extended beyond his marriage to me. His betrayal felt personal to them,
representing not just the end of his marriage to their daughter but the loss of someone they had trusted and cared about independently. They made it clear that he was no longer welcome at family gatherings and that they had no interest in maintaining any connection with him regardless of his relationship with Rachel. The professional consequences for both David and Rachel were subtle but equally significant. Austin's business community was relatively small and interconnected, making it difficult to hide personal scandals from professional contact. David's reputation for integrity and reliability, which had been important assets in his client relationships and business development efforts, was damaged by revelations about his personal conduct. Several clients questioned whether someone who would deceive his wife for months could be trusted with their business interests. Rachel faced similar challenges in her event planning career, which depended heavily on personal relationships and social connections within Austin's corporate community. Many of the networking contacts she had developed through David and me became unavailable once the affair became public knowledge. Her professional reputation was further complicated by questions about her judgment and reliability, as potential clients wondered whether someone who would have an affair with her sister's husband could be trusted to manage their important events with appropriate discretion. The house became my sanctuary during this difficult period, a space where I could process the changes in my life without external pressure or unwanted contact from David and Rachel. The rooms that had once felt contaminated by their affair gradually transformed back into my personal retreat, as I replaced furniture and redecorated spaces to reflect my individual taste rather than our shared aesthetic preferences. The master bedroom required the most extensive changes, since it was where I had discovered evidence of their affair and where they had violated my trust most directly. I replaced the bedding, rearranged the furniture, and added personal touches that made the space feel uniquely mine rather than connected to my failed marriage. The process was both therapeutic and symbolic, representing my reclamation of the home I had worked so hard to create. Financial independence became increasingly empowering as I adjusted to managing all household expenses without David's contribution. My salary at Digital Dynamics was sufficient to cover the mortgage, property taxes, utilities, and maintenance costs, while still allowing for comfortable living and modest saving. The house that had once felt like a stretch for two incomes became manageable for one when that income wasn't supplemented by supporting someone else's lifestyle and deception. The realization that I was financially better off without David came as a surprise, though it shouldn't have been given how much money he had been spending on his affair with Rachel. Without his business dinners, travel expenses, gifts for another woman, and contribution to Rachel's lifestyle, my monthly budget showed significant improvement, despite losing his income contribution. His presence in my life had been a financial drain disguised as partnership. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected visit from Rachel, who arrived at my door looking tired and defeated in ways that suggested her new life wasn't meeting her expectations. She asked if we could talk about rebuilding our relationship and finding a way to move forward as sisters despite everything that had happened between us. Her request seemed genuine, but it was also clearly motivated by practical concerns about her social isolation and the practical challenges of maintaining her relationship with David. I listened to Rachel's apology and her explanations about how the affair had developed gradually despite their initial resistance to their attraction. She claimed that David had been unhappy in our marriage for some time and that their relationship had provided them both with emotional support they weren't receiving elsewhere. Her version of events painted their affair as an inevitable response to pre-existing problems rather than a deliberate choice to betray family relationships for personal satisfaction. When Rachel finished her explanation, I thanked her for her honesty and told her that I understood her perspective on the situation. I also explained that understanding her choices didn't require me to accept them or pretend that our relationship could return to its previous. The trust that had existed between us had been permanently damaged by her decision to pursue David while maintaining our sisterly relationship, and that damage couldn't be repaired through apologies or explanation. I told Rachel that I wished her well in her relationship with David and hoped they would find happiness together, but that I needed to maintain distance from both of them to protect my own emotional well-being. She could continue being part of our extended family, but our personal relationship would need to remain limited to polite interaction at unavoidable family gatherings. The boundaries I was establishing weren't punishment but rather necessary protection for my ability to heal and move forward. Rachel's reaction to my decision was disappointment, mixed with what seemed like genuine sadness about the permanent change in our relationship. She had apparently hoped that time and her apology would be sufficient to restore our sisterly bond, not fully understanding that some betrayals create irreversible changes, regardless of the good intentions that might follow them. Her request for a second chance was heartfelt, but it was based on her needs rather than consideration of what would be healthy for me. David made his own attempt at reconciliation several months later, reaching out through mutual friends to suggest that we meet for coffee to discuss our relationship and possible friendship moving forward. His message indicated that he had been reflecting on his choices and wanted to take responsibility for his mistakes while exploring whether we could find a way to maintain some kind of positive connection despite our failed marriage. I declined his invitation politely but firmly, explaining through our mutual friend that I had no interest in maintaining any relationship with David, beyond the minimal contact required to finalize the remaining aspects of our divorce. His affair with Rachel had revealed fundamental character traits that made me question everything I had believed about him during our marriage, and I had no desire to rebuild trust with someone who had demonstrated such capacity for deception and betrayal. The message I sent back to David through our friend was simple but complete. I held no anger toward him and genuinely hoped he would find happiness with Rachel, but our relationship had ended permanently when he chose to have an affair rather than address whatever problems he perceived in our marriage. His decision to pursue my sister while maintaining the facade of a loving husband had eliminated any possibility of friendship or ongoing connection between us. 1 year after our divorce was finalized, I attended a work conference in Dallas where I encountered several people who knew David professionally. Their questions about our divorce were handled easily with brief explanations about growing apart and wanting different things from life. The conversations reminded me how much I had moved forward from the devastation I had felt during the initial discovery of the affair and how completely I had rebuilt my life around my own goals and values. The house continued to appreciate and value, making my decision to retain ownership increasingly beneficial from a financial perspective. Property values in Westlake Hills had increased significantly since our purchase, meaning my equity in the home had grown substantially despite David's departure from the mortgage. The investment I had made with my inheritance had proven to be not just emotionally important, but financially strategic as well. More importantly, the house had become a symbol of my ability to create and maintain a beautiful life independent. The spaces that had once felt empty without David's presence were now filled with friendships, hobbies, and personal interests that reflected my individual identity rather than our shared marriage. I had discovered aspects of myself that had been submerged during our relationship, and exploring those discoveries had been one of the unexpected benefits of becoming single again. Kelly and I developed an even closer friendship during my post-divorce period, spending time together in ways that revealed how much energy I had been investing in managing David's needs and maintaining our marriage at the expense of other relationships. Our conversations became deeper and more honest as I shared details about the affair and my process of rebuilding my life, while she provided perspective and encouragement that helped me recognize my own strength and resilience. The relationship with my parents stabilized over time as they processed their disappointment about Rachel's choices and their grief about the end of my marriage. Linda and Robert had loved David genuinely, and losing him felt like a family death that required its own mourning process. Their support for me was unwavering, but they also needed time to understand how someone they had trusted so completely could have deceived them as thoroughly as he had deceived me. Rachel and David's relationship faced challenges that became apparent to mutual acquaintances over time. The passion that had driven their affair apparently didn't translate into compatibility for daily life, as they struggled with practical issues like financial management, social integration, and family relationships. Their romance had been built on secrecy and excitement, and the mundane realities of legitimate partnership seemed to diminish some of its appeal. Friends reported that David appeared to be struggling financially with the lifestyle adjustments required by his independence and his support of Rachel's expectations. The expensive dinners, weekend trips, and luxury purchases that had characterized their affair were unsustainable on his income alone, especially with the debt obligations from our divorce and his need to establish entirely new household systems without access to my resources. Rachel's career had suffered from the social consequences of their affair, limiting her professional opportunities and social connections in ways that affected both her income potential and her satisfaction with her Austin experience.
The event planning industry depended heavily on reputation and relationships, both of which had been damaged by her association with breaking up a marriage within the close-knit community where she was trying to build her business. 2 years after our divorce, I received news through family channels that David and Rachel had broken up after a series of arguments about money, family relationships, and future plans. Their relationship had apparently been unable to withstand the practical pressures of legitimate partnership once the excitement of forbidden romance had faded. David had moved to Houston for a new job opportunity, while Rachel was considering returning to Nashville or possibly relocating to another city entirely. The news of their breakup created complex emotions for me, not satisfaction exactly, but a sense of validation about my understanding of their character and the sustainability of their relationship. They had destroyed a marriage and permanently damaged family relationships for a romance that ultimately couldn't survive the transition from secrecy to reality. Their choices had caused tremendous pain for multiple people in service of something that proved to be temporary rather than the lasting love they had claimed justified their betrayal. By the 3rd anniversary of our divorce, I had built a life that was fuller and more satisfying than my marriage had been, even before David's affair. My career had flourished as I invested the energy I had previously spent managing marital concerns into professional development and business relationships. Digital Dynamics had promoted me to senior director, with responsibilities that included strategic planning and client development activities that utilized my natural strengths and interests. The house had become the center of a social life that reflected my individual preferences and values, rather than the compromises required by marriage. I hosted dinner parties, book clubs, and informal gatherings that brought together friends from various aspects of my life in ways that felt natural and enjoyable. The entertaining style I developed was more relaxed and authentic than the formal events David and I had coordinated during our marriage. My relationship with my parents had deepened as we worked together to heal from Rachel's betrayal and build new family traditions that honored our changed circumstances. Linda and Robert had come to see my divorce as ultimately beneficial, recognizing that David's affair had revealed character flaws that would have eventually caused problems regardless of the specific trigger. Their pride in my resilience and independence was evident in our conversations and their support for my new life direction. The financial benefits of my situation continued to accumulate over time. Without David's expenses and with my increased salary, I was able to save significantly while maintaining a comfortable lifestyle and making home improvements that increased both my enjoyment of the property and its market value. The mortgage balance decreased steadily, building equity that represented genuine wealth rather than the paper assets that had characterized our shared financial situation. Most importantly, I had discovered that my capacity for happiness and fulfillment was not dependent on romantic partnership or family approval in the ways I had previously believed. The devastating betrayal that had initially felt like the end of my life had actually been the beginning of a more authentic and satisfying existence built around my own goals, values, and choices rather than the compromises and accommodations required by relationships with people who didn't share my commitment to honesty and loyalty. Standing in my beautiful kitchen 3 years after the 4th of July party that had exposed David and Rachel's affair, I felt grateful for the painful lessons that had taught me the difference between relationships based on convenience and those built on genuine respect and care. The house that David had once assumed he would share permanently had become the foundation for a life that was entirely my own, purchased with my inheritance, maintained through my effort, and filled with people who chose to be there because they valued me rather than what I could provide for them. 3 years after that devastating 4th of July party, I found myself hosting my annual summer gathering again, though this time the guest list looked dramatically different. Gone were the complicated family dynamics and hidden betrayals that had poisoned previous celebrations. Instead, my backyard was filled with genuine friends, supportive colleagues, and family members who had proven their loyalty through actions rather than words. The atmosphere was lighter, more authentic, and infinitely more peaceful than those final parties during my marriage to Dave. Kelly Martinez stood beside me at the outdoor kitchen, helping me arrange appetizers while sharing the latest neighborhood gossip with the easy familiarity of someone who had become family by choice rather than obligation. Her presence had been constant throughout my divorce and recovery, proving that some friendships deepen through crisis rather than fracturing under pressure. She had witnessed my transformation from a woman struggling to understand her husband's betrayal into someone who had built a life of genuine contentment and independence. The house itself had undergone significant changes that reflected my evolution as its sole owner and decision-maker. I had remodeled the master suite completely, eliminating every trace of the space David and Rachel had contaminated with their affair. The new design was entirely my aesthetic: clean lines, soothing colors, and luxurious touches that made the room feel like a personal retreat rather than a shared compromise. The renovation had been expensive, but it was an investment in my emotional well-being that had paid dividends in restoring my sense of home and sanctuary. Sarah Williams, the therapist who had helped me navigate the emotional complexities of betrayal and divorce, arrived fashionably late with her husband and teenage daughter. Sarah had become more than a professional counselor during our sessions together. She had evolved into a mentor and friend, whose wisdom extended far beyond the boundaries of our therapeutic relationship. Her presence at my party felt symbolic of how much I had grown and healed, transitioning from someone who needed professional support to someone who could offer guidance and friendship to others facing similar challenges. The financial transformation in my life was perhaps the most dramatic and satisfying aspect of my post-divorce evolution. Without David's expenses, business entertainment costs, and the hidden financial drain of his affair with Rachel, my monthly budget had improved so significantly that I was able to accelerate my mortgage payments while maintaining a comfortable lifestyle and building substantial savings. The house that had once felt like a financial stretch for two incomes had become easily manageable for one, especially as my career continued to flourish and my salary increased. Digital Dynamics had promoted me to executive director 18 months after my divorce, recognizing both my professional competence and my renewed focus on career development. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase and equity participation that made me feel genuinely wealthy for the first time in my life. My success at work was deeply satisfying, representing achievement that was entirely my own rather than dependent on anyone else's support or approval. The equity in my house had grown dramatically due to both mortgage payments and Austin's continued real estate appreciation. Property values in Westlake Hills had increased by nearly 40% since David and I had purchased our home, meaning my net worth had grown substantially even as I was eliminating debt and building liquid savings. The inheritance I had used for our down payment had proven to be one of the best investments I could have made, though I never could have predicted the circumstances that would make me its sole beneficiary. Amanda Rodriguez, my real estate attorney, attended the party with her family, bringing her expertise and friendship to a celebration that felt like a victory lap for the legal strategies we had implemented during my divorce. Amanda had become both a professional advisor and personal friend, someone whose guidance had proven invaluable not just during the divorce proceedings, but in the ongoing management of my real estate investments and estate planning consideration. The conversation during dinner centered around travel plans, career achievements, and personal growth stories that reflected the positive energy of people who had chosen to invest in their own development rather than spending their energy on dramatic relationship conflict. My guests were accomplished, interesting individuals who brought intellectual stimulation and emotional support to my life in ways that felt both comfortable and inspiring. The quality of relationships in my post-divorce life was dramatically higher than the social obligations and surface-level friendships that had characterized my marriage year. Michael Chen, my financial advisor, shared updates about market performance and investment strategies over cocktails, though our professional relationship had evolved into genuine friendship based on shared values and mutual respect. Michael's guidance had been instrumental in helping me structure my finances for long-term independence and security, ensuring that my divorce settlement and career success translated into lasting wealth rather than temporary comfort. The absence of David and Rachel from my social circle was no longer painful or noticeable. They had simply faded from relevance as I built new traditions and relationships around people who shared my values and respected my boundaries. Occasionally, mutual acquaintances would mention seeing them around Austin or hearing updates about their lives, but their choices and circumstances had become as distant from my daily reality as characters in a book I had finished reading years ago. Linda and Robert arrived with their usual warmth and enthusiasm, though their relationship with Rachel remained strained and conditional. They had worked hard to rebuild trust with their younger daughter, but the process was slow and complicated by Rachel's apparent inability to accept full responsibility for her choices and their consequences. My parents' support for me throughout the divorce and recovery had been unwavering, demonstrating the difference between family relationships based on genuine love and those maintained through obligation or convenience. The conversation with my parents revealed that Rachel had indeed left Austin permanently, relocating to Denver where she was attempting to rebuild her career and personal life away from the social complications her affair had created. David had apparently thrived in Houston, where his business skills and professional reputation had recovered from the damage caused by his personal scandal. Their relationship had ended badly, with financial disputes and recriminations that confirmed my assessment of their character and compatibility. Linda shared that Rachel had asked repeatedly about the possibility of reconciling with me, apparently believing that time and distance might have softened my position about maintaining boundaries between us. My mother's questions about my willingness to consider rebuilding our sisterly relationship were gentle but persistent, reflecting her natural desire to see her daughters reconnect despite the circumstances that had driven us apart. I explained to Linda that my decision to maintain distance from Rachel wasn't based on anger or resentment, emotions that had faded significantly over time, but rather on practical considerations about what kinds of relationships contributed positively to my life and well-being. Rachel had demonstrated her willingness to prioritize her personal desires over family loyalty and her capacity for sustained deception when it served her purposes. Those character traits made her an unsuitable candidate for the kind of close, trusting relationship I preferred to maintain with people in my inner circle. The conversation with my parents also revealed details about David's attempts to maintain contact with our extended family, apparently hoping to preserve some of the relationships he had valued during our marriage. His efforts had been politely but firmly rebuffed by family members who felt that his betrayal of me represented a betrayal of their trust and affection as well. The completeness of his social exile from our family network was gratifying confirmation that actions have consequences and that character matters more than charm when people make difficult decisions about loyalty and respect. Thomas Bradley, my divorce attorney, attended with his wife and shared updates about other cases that reminded me how fortunate I had been in the structure of my marriage and the timing of my discovery of David's affair. Many of his clients faced far more complex financial entanglements and custody disputes that extended their legal proceedings for years rather than months. My situation had been resolved quickly and definitively because of careful documentation, strategic planning, and David's voluntary departure from our marriage rather than attempts to fight for assets he hadn't earned. The legal landscape around divorce and property rights had evolved in ways that would have been even more favorable to my position if the proceedings had occurred later, but Thomas assured me that our settlement had been optimal given the circumstances and timeline of my case. His expertise had been crucial in protecting my interests while avoiding the kind of prolonged litigation that often accompanies high-asset divorces, especially those involving adultery and financial deception. As the evening progressed and guests settled into comfortable conversations around the pool and outdoor seating areas, I reflected on how dramatically my definition of success and happiness had evolved since my marriage ended. During my years with David, I had measured my life's quality primarily through the lens of our shared achievements and social status, focusing on external markers like our beautiful home, impressive careers, and carefully curated social life. The life I had built as a single woman was more internally focused and personally satisfying, centered around authentic relationships, professional fulfillment, and the peace that comes from living according to your own values rather than maintaining appearances or managing other people's expectations. The absence of drama, deception, and emotional manipulation had created space for genuine contentment and personal growth that felt more valuable than any of the external markers I had previously prioritized. My friendship with Dr. Williams had introduced me to concepts about emotional intelligence and relationship patterns that had transformed my understanding of healthy boundaries and authentic connection. The work we had done together during my divorce recovery had equipped me with tools for recognizing and avoiding toxic dynamics,
while building relationships based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than convenience or shared circumstance. The professional success I had achieved since my divorce felt more meaningful and sustainable than the career progress I had made during my marriage, largely because it was based entirely on my own efforts and decisions rather than influenced by the need to accommodate David's schedule expectations or financial pressures. My focus and energy were completely available for career development, allowing me to pursue opportunities and challenges that might have been complicated by marital consideration. The house itself had become a symbol of female independence and financial empowerment that extended beyond my personal situation to represent broader principles about women's ability to create and maintain wealth independently. Friends and colleagues often commented on my beautiful home and asked for advice about real estate investments, career development, and financial planning strategies that could help them achieve similar independence and security. Kelly's daughter Emma, now 10 years old, had become a regular visitor who treated my house like a second home where she could swim, do homework, and enjoy the kind of adult attention and mentorship that enriched her development. Emma's presence reminded me that family could be created through choice and affection rather than just biological connection, and that my life was full of meaningful relationships even without marriage or children of my own. The impact of my divorce and recovery on my career had been entirely positive, challenging stereotypes about how personal crises affect professional performance and demonstrating that sometimes major life changes create opportunities for growth and advancement rather than setbacks and limitations. My colleagues and clients had witnessed my resilience and strategic thinking during a difficult period, earning respect and confidence that translated into increased responsibilities and leadership opportunities. The financial independence I had achieved was particularly satisfying because it represented security and freedom that couldn't be compromised by anyone else's choices or behavior. The house was mine, the career was mine, the savings were mine, and the future I was building was entirely under my control rather than dependent on maintaining relationships with people whose character and priorities I couldn't predict or influence. Amanda's presence at the party reminded me of the legal protections and strategic planning that had made my post-divorce success possible, emphasizing the importance of understanding your rights and preparing for worst-case scenarios even when you hope and expect the best from people you love. The prenuptial agreement that had seemed unnecessary during the romantic excitement of wedding planning had proven to be one of the most valuable documents I had ever signed. The absence of financial stress in my life was perhaps the most underrated benefit of my situation, eliminating the anxiety and conflict that money issues create in many relationships, while allowing me to make decisions based on personal preferences and long-term goals rather than immediate financial pressure. The mortgage payments that had once felt overwhelming were now easily manageable, and the prospect of owning my home outright within the next few years felt both achievable and exciting. As the party wound down and guests began making their departures, I found myself standing on my deck overlooking the pool and gardens, surrounded by the physical manifestation of dreams I had achieved through my own efforts and determination. The space was exactly what I had wanted when David and I first toured the house, but it had become something even better, a reflection of my individual taste and priorities rather than a compromise between different visions and preferences. The summer evening was perfect, with comfortable temperatures and clear skies that showcased the Austin Hill country views that had initially attracted us to the property. The outdoor kitchen, where David had once grilled for our guests, now served as my personal entertainment center, equipped with appliances and accessories I had chosen based on my own cooking style and entertaining preferences rather than shared decisions and compromise. Kelly was the last to leave, staying behind to help with cleanup and share the kind of intimate conversation that marks the end of successful social gathering. Her friendship had been tested and strengthened through my divorce crisis, proving that some relationships become deeper and more valuable when they survive difficult circumstances rather than existing only during comfortable times. The financial calculations I did while cleaning up the party confirmed what I already knew. My monthly expenses had decreased significantly since my divorce while my income had increased, creating a substantial surplus that I was using to accelerate debt elimination and build long-term wealth. The house that had once required two incomes to afford comfortably was now easily managed by one, especially as my career continued to advance and my salary grew. The mortgage balance had decreased to less than half of the home's current market value, representing substantial equity that would continue growing through both payments and appreciation. The investment I had made with my grandmother's inheritance had proven to be brilliant financial strategy, providing both personal satisfaction and wealth building that would benefit me for decades to come. Looking back on the journey from that terrible discovery in Whole Foods to the peaceful celebration I had just hosted, I felt profound gratitude for the painful lessons that had taught me the difference between relationships built on genuine respect and those maintained through convenient obligation or shared assets. David and Rachel had done me an enormous favor by revealing their true characters before I had wasted more years on relationships that were fundamentally dishonest and unsustainable. The life I had built in the aftermath of their betrayal was more authentic, peaceful, and financially secure than anything I could have achieved while trying to maintain a marriage with someone whose values and priorities were incompatible with my own. Their affair had been devastating at the time, but it had ultimately freed me to discover my own strength and create a future based on my individual goals and preferences rather than the compromises and accommodations required by partnership with the wrong person. Standing in my beautiful kitchen at midnight loading the dishwasher and putting away the remnants of another successful gathering, I realized that the house David had once assumed he would share permanently had become the foundation for a life that exceeded every dream I had harbored during our marriage. The betrayal that had once felt like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of a more satisfying and authentic existence. The mortgage that David would have shared responsibility for was now entirely mine to manage and eventually eliminate, representing both the burden and the privilege of complete financial independence. The equity that was accumulating month by month belonged entirely to me, building wealth that would provide security and opportunities for whatever adventures and challenges the future might bring. The silence in the house after everyone had left was peaceful rather than lonely, filled with the satisfaction that comes from hosting people you genuinely care about in a space that reflects your own taste and value. The master bedroom that had once felt contaminated by David and Rachel's betrayal had been transformed into a personal sanctuary that represented my recovery and growth rather than my victimization and loss. As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I thought about the woman I had been 3 years ago, trusting, naive, focused on maintaining relationships that were slowly destroying her from within. That version of myself felt like a different person, someone I remembered fondly but could never become again. The education I had received about human nature, financial independence, and emotional resilience had been expensive and painful, but it had also been invaluable and permanent. The future stretched ahead with possibilities that were entirely mine to choose and create, unconstrained by anyone else's preferences, limitations, or deceptions. The house that had once symbolized shared dreams now represented individual achievement and independence. The career that had once been balanced against marital obligations now provided unlimited opportunities for growth and advancement. The relationships that remained in my life had been tested and proven worthy of the investment they required. David and Rachel's betrayal had taught me that some losses are actually gains in disguise, that some endings create space for better beginnings, and that the worst thing that happens to you can sometimes become the catalyst for the best decisions you'll ever make. They had chosen temporary passion over lasting loyalty, secret excitement over honest partnership, and personal desire over family responsibility. I had chosen differently, and the consequences of our respective choices had played out exactly as character and values would predict. The house where their affair had been planned and executed had become the site of my recovery and triumph, proving that physical spaces can be reclaimed and transformed, just like lives and futures can be rebuilt and improved. The $2 million mortgage that David had once shared was now my responsibility and my asset, representing both the challenge and the reward of complete financial independence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.